Stephen and Carolyn, certainly no laughing matter. I can tell you police have their hands full with these possible sightings. Let me get to the first one. Detectives were out here for several hours along with officers looking for any sign of a possible clown. Right now, I am at Sterling.
This past year has been pretty eventful, and as a result, it's kind of overshadowed some of the things that have happened in the past. One thing that I want to talk about today is in 2016, we experienced what might be called the Year of the Clown. Throughout that year, and particularly in the United States of America, but also across the globe, and including Canada, a number of different clown-related sightings were reported to police services. In some cases, the sightings were primarily focused on the fact that a clown, or really an individual dressed like a clown, was acting in a strange or perhaps menacing manner. In a few other cases, the clowns were actually doing something that was criminalized, whether robbing a bank, harassing people, or otherwise engaging in some sort of mischief, which, by the way, in Canada, there are criminal code violations relating to mischief. It was a perfect moral panic, hinging on an undercurrent of coulrophobia, the fear of clowns. This relates to the uncanny, exaggerated form of clowns, their representation in popular media, including their association with John Wayne Gacy, and our inability to read their facial expressions. Over the past few decades, clowns have become the modern boogeyman. The media loved this. A handful of social media videos, picked up by various news stations around the world, depicting clowns in action, became headline news and earned millions of views. Its coverage seemed to suggest that these clowns were practicing some form of occult ritual that endangered the public. By October of that year, with Halloween quickly approaching, public responses to clown sightings reached a fevered pitch. An unsubstantiated claim that several clowns were spotted on the Penn State University campus, for example, led to a posse of more than 500 students seeking them out. The vast majority of these reported sightings, however, were hoaxes. So did the media play a role in perpetuating this myth? Was it complicit in stirring public hysteria? And of the few verified the vast majority of these reported sightings, however, were hoaxes. Did the media play a role in perpetuating this myth? Was it complicit in stirring public hysteria? And of the few verified cases where people dressed as clowns actually did commit crimes, did the media have a hand in driving them to do this? Today we're going to talk about media-born criminogenesis, and hopefully develop some insights. Before we get too far into today's conversation, I wanted to stop and focus on the term criminogenesis. This is a critical concept in criminological theory, and it's this idea that there is some sort of determinable source of criminal behaviors, that if we dig deep enough, whether from an environmental standpoint, a social standpoint, a psychological standpoint, or many of the other myriad of theories for crime that exist, we can perhaps find the source as to why individuals engage in criminalized behaviors. This is an old concept, and it lies at the core of many foundational criminological theories. These are the theories that you might generally call the classical theories, and they relied on a rather simple definition that criminogenesis is an assessment process which aims to identify one or more possible reasons that could explain why individuals commit crime or deviant behaviors. Historically, many of the classical criminologists who you have learned about focused on criminogenesis as a sort of malaise or illness that led a person astray. Cesare Beccaria, for example, infamously attempted to connect criminality with a person's physical form, and most notably, their head. He had a very early affinity for phrenology. Other scholars, who you may remember, like Edwin Sutherland or James Q. Wilson, felt that crime was inherent to the individual and that criminogenesis was prevented simply by the morality of the public. More recently, criminologists have begun to take a pluralistic perspective on crime and deviance, suggesting that perhaps criminogenesis is a function of multiple intersecting factors. Surratt provides us with a critical consideration of one such factor: the media. The media has long been scrutinized for its content, particularly its depictions of violence and sexuality. In fact, censorship of violence predates even Hollywood, with some of the earliest laws relating to film coming into force in the late 1890s. By the 1920s, when films began to really take off, a number of states and countries began creating legislation intended to limit the public's exposure to violent, sexual, or misleading imagery, on the assumption that this media may undermine public morals. Eventually, a motion picture production code was produced by lawmakers and Hollywood executives, providing filmmakers with a list of banned subjects, as well as cautions against an additional 25 items. The 11 banned subjects included pointed profanity, by either title or lip, including swear words and religious items, any licentious or suggestive nudity, in fact or in silhouette, the illegal traffic in drugs, any inference of sex perversion, which would have included premarital relations, adultery, and same-sex relations, amongst other things, white slavery, which today is often called sex trafficking, miscegenation, which is sexual relations between people of different ethnic backgrounds, particularly people of color and Caucasian individuals, sex hygiene and venereal diseases, scenes of actual childbirth, in fact or in silhouette, children's sexual organs, ridicule of the clergy, or willful offense to any nation, race, or creed. These guidelines were enforced for approximately 40 years, ending in the late 1960s. Despite this relatively short time span, the code dramatically shaped the portrayal of crime in the early days of film and established long-standing tropes about law enforcers, and lawbreakers. It wasn't until the late 1990s and the era of gritty reality that we began to see more nuanced discussion of crime and its perpetrators. While there is no official censorship body today, film and television producers continue to self-police their work. The motion picture content rating system, which applies age ratings that we see with film these days, are generally applied by industry committees as a sort of voluntary process. The impetus for censorship, or ratings in this case, is now driven by profit margins and organizational reputation. Recall here the organizational model proposed by Surratt, which suggests that media producers will shape their outputs to align with the widest audience possible in order to maximize profits. The current state of self-censorship harkens back to the 100-year-old moralities that dictate what different members of the public should see. This begs the question: does the adherence to these systems indicate that the film and television industries believe their products can affect people? And this leads to bigger questions, perhaps even a direct linkage between Hollywood and criminogenesis. Fortunately, this doesn't seem to be the case, other than extreme circumstances, which we'll talk about in class. One thing we should pay attention to, especially in the future, however, is how the internet might begin to affect these things. That's about it for today. Hopefully you've enjoyed this, and please let me know if you have any feedback. I'll see you in class.